Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I'm Mark State. And as always, a whopping great thank you to everyone who keeps this podcast on the go. That includes our patrons over on Patreon and our Bestseller Academics on the Bestseller Academy. If you want to support the podcast, and why wouldn't you, pop over to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. Be like our latest supporter, Liz Haberman. Be one of the cool kids and keep us going, because we're not just the Bestseller Experiment. We're the award-winning Bestseller Experiment. Yay!
This is insane, isn't it? Right, we better just explain to people what this is. For anyone not on YouTube seeing Mark waving this amazing podcast, well, this is really exciting, isn't it?
This is a quality bit of perspex, mate, and a bit of it's got weight. It's got weight. So we'll talk about this more at the end, because we could talk about this for an hour, and we don't want to overshadow our very special guest this week. But yes, at the Independent Podcast Awards this week, Bestseller Experiment won Best Books Podcast, and we are absolutely over the moon about it. It's just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But yes, we'll more about this later. With the other wins, we've got our list. See what happens, we have our listener wins at the end, and we've got one. So
we've got a win to slip in, haven't we, as well? Brilliant
exactly,
stuff. So stay to the end to listen more about the experience of the award ceremony in London that Mark went to and all the rest of it. Brilliant stuff. Excellent. And I mean, you've been back and forth to London a fair few times, haven't you?
Oh my God, it's bonkers week. I was at the MCM Comic Con all weekend last weekend, which was just fantastic. So I did a couple of panels, which I would normally do. It was really good fun. But I had a table the whole weekend, which I haven't done for a few years now. And the difference is, back then I had maybe 2 books. Now I got 7, and it was fantastic. I learned a lot. I sold out of the Crowfolk, and I realized now I need to take 4 times as many Crowfolk as the other book, because it's the gateway book. It's the first one in the series. I sold my last ever copy, Unbound. You know, Unbound paperbacks.
I saw that. You put a
so
post
my
up
last
about
ever
like
copy
the
of
paperback physical copy, right? Because there's
of the End of Magic. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So they're all gone. They're all gone. I mean, I got
that must have felt
a couple
weird
on my shelf.
What did
it
that
really
feel like?
did.
What did it feel like seeing that book like disappear off into the distance, like you're a kind of child
really
leaving home almost?
It was really strange. I mean, I've only got 4 copies of Robot Overlords left. I think that's out of print now. I need to check that. So yeah, it was really, really strange, and it was quite sad. Now, I am working on a sequel to The End of Magic, and I'm going to relaunch them next year. In fact, I'm thinking May Comic-Con. That's a good deadline to try and get everything sorted. So The End of Magic will be back in paperback, but I'm going to have new artwork on it. I'm going to completely revamp that and the second one. So yeah, and it was just great. I ran out of bookmarks. I've woefully underestimated how much people like a free bookmark, because people, if they're in 2 minds, or they say, oh, is it on Kindle? Is it on Audible? Is it? And you go, yeah, here's a bookmark. People love a free bookmark.
It's almost like a kind of a mini business card, but it's also something physical that they can take home, and then it reminds them of the book where they can buy it.
I mean, people took photos of the books as well and stuff like that, so that helped. But yeah, so lesson learned there. So yeah, it was just great to see lots of new readers and old friends. A big shout out to our friend Phil Oddie, who does the 200 word a day challenge, and his son. I hope the lightsaber training went well and no limbs were lost. It can get quite aggressive in there. So yeah, it was a fantastic weekend. Definitely going back. So Mr. D, any news on the non-fiction front?
Well, yes, I'm there's a lot of background stuff. This is kind of a big build up for next year, but I've actually put the website together.
Oh.
I've got the logo, got the first post, but it's not out there. All I will say though is Google is incredibly fast at indexing. Yeah. Like literally within about 2 hours. Because the word of, okay, so here's a little bit of a teaser. The word that I've come up with a word that doesn't exist. I've registered the domain name of it. It's never been on Google before, but literally within 2 hours of me launching the website, there it was. And I thought, this is mad how quickly like something comes into existence that never existed. Like in the whole, it's never been mentioned in any, not even the word, in any text, like going back through history. But it's an 8-letter word.
Ooh,
and it's, I could not believe, it's like one of those moments, Mark, when it happened, I looked at it and went, oh yeah, but this is going to be like, there'll be some blooming great corporation that uses this word or this. And I typed it in, and when I pressed the button and nothing came up, and then I went to see the .com, I thought, this is fate. This is destiny. This is the word.
Yeah.
And I want to tell you a little quick story of how this came about, because for many, many years, you probably know that I've been working on this concept called 4,000 Saturdays. And there was a book that came out I think about a year ago, called 4,000 Weeks.
Yes.
And it's become a #1 New York Times bestseller. And I'm going to be talking more about this. I didn't want to bring it up. No, I'm going to be talking more about this because I found out about it from people like contact me saying, have you seen this? Have you seen it? And I'm like, ooh. Anyway, so there's a whole interesting backstory to what I was meant to be doing, which is writing a book called 4,000 Saturdays. And now how I've not had to pivot, but decided to pivot, and how this whole new world has opened up in a really beautiful way. So great story, but I'm going to save that for a bit later on because, again, I could take you for like 3 days over that. But it's just mind blowing what's happening. Like, it's just like you just keep following little kind of doors that open and you see where they go. And it's really exciting stuff. Anyway, let's dive in and talk about our guest this week, Mark.
Our absolutely cracking episode this week with Mira V Shah. Mira is a British African Indian author and legal writer who lives in North London with a husband, 3 good dogs, and 1 mediocre cat. Now, before cat owners come at me, that's from Mira's own bio. I love cats, okay?
That's a good disclaimer, Mark. It could have got nasty out there.
Mira studied history before practicing as a city lawyer. And during the pandemic, Mira wrote her first ever novel, Her, a psychological drama. And we talk about that. We also discuss getting into character when writing, her brilliant blog piece that came out in March this year on managing the expectations of new authors. And that went viral. It's picked up by the bookseller. It's brilliant. Link in the show notes. And how she was able to heal through writing.
Brilliant stuff. So let's dive in and listen to Mark chatting with the inspirational Mira V Shah.
Mira Shah, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today?
Oh, I am very well, thanks. I'm very excited to be here.
Very excited to have you on. We're very excited about the paperback publication of Her, your amazing debut novel, which is upon us any minute now, if not already. And it's absolutely cracking thriller, getting amazing reviews. And it's a story about female friendships and how we think we know people. Tell us more about Her.
Yeah, exactly that. So whilst it has sort of explores many themes, sort of like young adult grief and loneliness, and there's a bit of race and privilege in there as well. You are quite right, Mark. Essentially, it is at its heart about the nuances and complexities of female friendship. And so it's set on this sort of, it's kind of a psychological drama, I would say, probably more on the drama end than the thriller end of things. But it's set on this domestic North London suburban street. And it centres on these 2 characters, these 2 young women in their 20s. So we've got Rani on one hand, who she is a stay-at-home mum of 2, and she sees the world through sort of her tiny shoebox flat that she rents with her partner, Joel. And it's very apparent when you read that Rani is quite depressed, she's lonely, she's resentful, her life is just not how she thought it would be. And when we meet her, we realise that she's sort of at that point of desperation in her life. On the flip side, we have Natalie, who is basically an antithesis of Rani, in the sense that she is a successful commercial lawyer. She's just sort of married handsome Charles, and they've bought this incredible mansion house just across the road from Rani. She is sort of one of those women that's sort of effortlessly put together, no matter what. She's, you almost don't even believe it, but she is. And Rani sort of looks at her and thinks, this is the perfect woman. This is who I aspire to be my whole life. And but what is really interesting about Natalie is that despite the sort of perfect world she's created for herself, inside she's sort of cripplingly lonely, and she doesn't really know why. And if you read her, you will find out.
Excellent stuff. Now, what I love about this is the structure of the narrative. You've got dual first-person narratives of Natalie and Rani, which really gives the story pace. So how aware of you were of that pacing, and how did you manage that pacing? Was it a simple kind of A, B kind of structure, or did you spend more time with one character and then flip to another? How did that work?
So what's interesting is I actually really enjoyed it because I think I know a lot of people sort of stay away from writing that dual person narrative because it's kind of hard to differentiate them within sort of themselves, and sometimes the characters can blend into each other. But I think what was quite good about her is that they were so different. So they started off at such different points in their lives. You know, Rani, as I mentioned before, was sort of depressed and she sees the world, you know, half class empty, whereas Natalie on the surface is sort of walking on clouds. So in that way, it was quite easy. But as the novel shifts, you kind of see this like almost opposite trajectories almost. So Natalie sort of, as her sort of past is revealed, as the truth is revealed, she changes. And Rani herself, she grows. She grows in confidence, she grows in determination, she finds some purpose. So it's almost like they kind of flip on themselves. So in that way, it was sort of different to maybe other books where the characters are quite similar and, you know, they share similar parts. But I kind of loved going on this journey with Rani and Natalie. But I have to say a lot of it, Mark, came out in the edit with my editor, because there were times where, you know, I would get comments like, this sounds more like Natalie.
Right.
This sounds like something Natalie would say. And then, you know, so that kind of stuff does happen. But that's what editors are for. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank God for editors.
Yeah, thank God for editors. Exactly
when you're writing in that first person, and I'm writing something at the moment that's in first person, and I find that it kind of helps to get into character a bit without getting too woo-woo. Did you get into character? Did you get into a certain kind of mindset when you're writing, you know, Natalie and Rani?
Yeah, so that's so interesting you say that, because it's my debut novel, and like I don't care what writers say, but I really do think that there is, in some way, they are autobiographical in some way or form. And like I think a lot of people, because Rani, like myself, is British Indian, would think that maybe identifying with Rani more. But actually, I could definitely see myself. So there's parts of me in both of those characters. So, you know, I have a sort of background in law. So like Natalie is my sort of successful commercial lawyer. I wasn't as successful as she was. I gave up pretty soon. But sort of I could sort of delve into that past, whereas sort of Rani, the experience that she has with race, the experience she has with, you know, being part of two cultures, but not really feeling like she belongs in either. That's something that I can identify with. So I definitely found it really therapeutic to write, sort of like putting on my hat but then kind of toying at the extremes of it as well, like playing with the extremes of that characters. It was really interesting.
The other fun thing when you write a dual narrative like this and you're in the first person is you will see Natalie through Rani's eyes and Rani through Natalie's eyes. Talk about those moments. Were they revealing? Did they help you as a writer at all?
Yeah, like that's such a good point, because it's like with Rani, when she first meets Natalie, she's like, wow, she's like perfect. She's someone I've always wanted to be. But as she sort of delves in closer, like, and the reader follows her on this journey, she realizes, and actually she herself at the end of the novel, I can't really remember what it verbatim, despite the fact that I did write it. She kind of goes to this revelation point going, actually, like I was really like prejudiced in the way that I saw you. Like I saw you as this perfect woman that like nothing could touch you. But like how wrong I was to think that. And like that's kind of the flawed perception part of this novel. Whereas, you know, I think Natalie sort of saw Rani, or even like Charles kind of sees Rani as this like stay-at-home mum that doesn't have anything going for her. She, you know, she's wearing baggy clothes and her hair's all a mess and stuff like that, and so he completely underestimates Rani, as you'll find out. And Rani sort of is really spearheading a lot of the novel, and it's her drive and it's her determination that sort of reaches that conclusion really of the novel. So yeah, it is it's definitely that. Definitely that.
Now, you mentioned there about not being able to quote it verbatim. This is I mean, we're going to talk about managing the expectations of authors and their readers later on, but this is one of these things you will get. You'd have written this 2-3 years ago. You might not have looked at it for 2 years, and people will go, that thing on page 74. You're like, I have no idea what you mean. Exactly. So don't worry about that. But this was pandemic book. You wrote it during lockdown, and during this is you and your husband in a flat with 3 dogs and a cat, and you wrote it in 3 months. Is that right?
Yeah, I wrote it in 3 months. I mean, wow. Mark, it was either that or divorce. Honestly, I think it was I had 2 options. Making banana bread wasn't cutting it. So no. I think it was one of those things where I never actually sort of intended or kind of wanted to be a writer as such. It never really occurred to me. But I'm one of those people that I'm very purpose driven. So once I set myself a task, I will generally complete it. And the novel was that. It was something that I needed, this kind of escapism from what was happening in the world. And this novel, the claustrophobia in the novel, the fact that it was all about sort of this quiet suburban street in London, it kind of reflected my own experience and a lot of people's experiences of living through the pandemic. So yeah, it was sort of therapeutic for so many reasons. But yeah, it also saved our marriage. No, I'm kidding. I hope my husband isn't listening.
I mean, for me, I had a second book in a contract to write at the beginning of lockdown, and it was difficult at first, but it became my happy place. It became the place I went to get away from what was on the news. Was that what it was like for you?
Yeah, you're so right. I think like a lot of people, I kind of stopped watching the news after a while. I'd kind of dip in, but I did find that it was it put you in a dark place that you were kind of already in, and you needed to escape from. And I was exactly the same as you, Mark. I had a sort of day job. I still have a day job. But when I sort of switched off for the end of the day, I think 2020 was really good weather-wise. So we were really fortunate to have a small little patio area as part of our flat. And so I would just kind of go out there with a glass of wine, and I would just keep writing throughout the evening. And it was amazing, as you know very well, escaping into a different world that's so different to your own, but also so similar to your own. So no, it's great.
And was there a sense of this being locked down and everything? Was there a sense of, I kind of have to do this now, or I'll never get this opportunity again? Was that kind of the feeling behind that?
I think you're right. So I actually was furloughed for 2 weeks. So whilst I wrote the book in 3 months, I wrote a massive part of it in those 2 weeks. So that was in itself we have 3 dogs, but we didn't have sort of children or anything. So in that sense, I wasn't having to deal with homeschooling, which I don't know how people manage to do that. Plus work as well. So in that way we were kind of blessed, and so I found myself with a lot more time in my hands. So it was definitely sort of a now or never thing for me. I found myself with the time to be able to write a novel in a shorter space of time than maybe I would have done if there hadn't been a pandemic. But yeah, it was also, I kind of did this course as well, which I thought was really useful for accountability. I don't know if you've probably heard of it, the Curtis Brown course. Yeah. So it kind of coincided with the pandemic. I think I applied for it in January of 2022. It was the 3-month sort of selective one. And I said to myself, if I get onto it, I have to, because they're not cheap, these courses, let's be honest.
No,
so I said
not.
to myself, yeah, well, they're really not. And so I said to myself that if I get onto it, I have to make the most out of this. I have to get to the end of the novel. So
yeah. Let's go. And let me know if you're okay talking about, we spoke about it before the recording, but your mum passed away when I think you were 19.
Yeah,
and
she did, yeah.
That's what, in a way, that sort of steered you towards writing. Can you talk about that and how that
Yeah,
how that
of
happened?
course. As I mentioned sort of earlier, I've never been one of those people that ever considered writing as a job, as a profession, as a job. I was absolutely a voracious reader, and that was sort of my mum's doing. We used to go to the library every weekend, and I would borrow all these books and just get through them really quickly. And I sort of always found comfort in books, but in the reading side of things, I never actually it never even occurred to me to consider writing. And I mean, it's not to say that I wasn't making up stories like we do as kids, but it's, the kind of transition from making up stories to actually considering yourself as a writer is very different. But for me, yeah, it was sort of my mum she was diagnosed very suddenly with a very aggressive form of cancer, and then within a couple of months she'd passed away. And I was, young adult, 19, finished university. And it wasn't, I found grief, like grieving for her, like pretty much impossible. It's almost like it didn't fit within the world that I had, like where it was just sort of focused on finding a job or having fun or, so I think I spent a lot of my early 20s in kind of denial because it was the only form of survival for me. I didn't really have the means of an outlet or anything, and it was only sort of at some point when I thought like mentally I think I just sunk in my grief, and I found to a point where I couldn't get out of bed. Like it was really bad. It really hit me, and I think it was just all this internalization of it. And I thought I needed to find something. And I just remember this moment of like switching on my laptop, just going to a Word document and just writing like literally whatever I was thinking. I just wrote it down on a page. And then I read it back, obviously, like a few weeks later. And I kind of thought, wow, it's like, it wasn't so much reading it back, but it was the process of writing that I thought, I actually feel a little bit better. I actually feel like more myself, like kind of because it's private thoughts that you don't feel like you can tell other people because you want to protect them and stuff. So yeah, it was exactly that. Like I came to writing through writing about my grief and sort of healing through writing, and that's when I kind of realized that I potentially could write. Like I actually had the ability to vocalize things that could resonate with people. And that's when I realized that potentially maybe I could be a writer. I could write a novel. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of how I came to writing. So yeah.
That's amazing. That is, and there's a lot. I mean, we've said this on the podcast a lot. There's a lot to be said just for getting the thoughts out of your head onto paper. It's a great way of processing complex things that are just swirling around in your mind. Just getting them on the page just helps make sense of them, doesn't it? So
exactly. I think a lot of people do morning pages. Have you heard of morning pages?
Yeah.
And that's like, I mean, yeah, my morning's a bit different with 3 dogs. I don't think I'll have, but I think I think it's one of those things where it forms a habit and you have to do it. Like it's a compulsion. So yeah.
Well, talking about writing habits, you are, as I understand, a write every day person, and you've got a full-time job and all the other things and dogs and there's, all sorts of other stuff on the way. Yeah. So tell us about your writing habit and how you've developed that.
Yeah, of course. So when I wrote my sort of debut novel, I very much was like a write everyday person. So I would sort of write in the morning before I started work, and then, as I mentioned, in the evening when I switched off. So it was very much, and then sort of when and even after that, I would kind of get up at 5 a.m. and have sort of a couple of hours before everyone else in the household woke up and stuff like that. But I haven't. It's sort of changed this year because I'm pregnant, so I can't. The thought of actually waking up at 5 a.m. is just not happening for me. So I'm actually really lucky. I managed to, whilst I'm working full time, I managed to do compressed hours. Negotiate that with my So it gives me Mondays as writing time. So I'm doing full time within Tuesday to Friday, which are long days, but at least Monday is my designated writing. And I can pretend I'm a full-time writer for one day. And it's glorious.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah. But I do think, though, the one thing I have to say about that, though, is I feel like writing every day is in some way important for me. Like I want to get back to that, because I think when you have that break you have to sink yourself back into the story, and it's almost harder.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It isn't it because it's like a different world, and when you're living your real world, you kind of forget what it's sort of like to be absorbed in it. So I feel like if you can write every day, even if it's like 200 words a day or something, I feel like that's really, really important habit to sort of,
We love those 200 words a day. We've got a whole thing about it.
I didn't even make. Do you know what? I didn't even make the connection until you said it. I was like, oh yeah, of
course. Let's talk about a blog piece that you wrote, which ended up in the bookseller. I don't know what came first, actually, the bookseller or the blog piece. You can tell me, which is titled "Launch Day: A Letdown," and it's a really powerful piece about managing the expectations of authors. And you were talking about how you weren't feeling excited about launch day. You said you were more excited about going to the tip that weekend. Which, speaking as a middle-aged man, that it can sometimes be the highlight of my week. But I have to confess, I've had the same feelings about launch days, particularly if you're not, your publisher's not letting off fireworks and doing a big, So tell us about the piece and how that came about and the reaction to it.
Yeah, for sure. So what I found since I've sort of been part of the writing community is that there's a lot of good news on social media, people sort of talking about positive experiences and and I think there is definitely a place for that. Don't get me wrong. I think those stories are really inspiring and they motivate you as a writer, but I feel like what that does is it creates a false perception of the industry. So, and I get it. I know as a writer, you want to sort of create this image of being successful because, that is the positive image would encourage people to buy your books. And I get that. So I think writers have this pressure to sort of portray things in a certain light. And I personally found that quite hard. I'm a very honest person, perhaps to my detriment sometimes, but that is who I am, and I don't want to change that. And so I feel sometimes that's hard because when all you're seeing is positive experiences, but that's not the reality. Even the most successful authors have setbacks in their careers, and I feel like we should be able to be honest. We should feel like we can speak truthfully about, our experiences. And I think it's only when you get to that successful point, do you feel like you can say, oh, I am where I am, but I have about 10 manuscripts in my drawer that were completely ignored by agents. It's only then you feel, but that shouldn't be the case, I think. So for me, it was, it was sort of publishing day. I'm sort of looking at, and the whole publishing experience, whilst I've had a good experience with my publisher, I think a lot of it was the fact that there's things that are out of my control.
Yes.
There's things that are out of their control.
Yeah.
And so expectations are kind of never, your expectations are never sort of matched by reality. And if they are, you're really lucky. Don't get me wrong, you're really lucky, and that does happen. Or sometimes expectations are surpassed. But in most people's cases, I think you have an expectation, and then the reality is very different. And that's fine. We should be able to talk about these things because, as we know, it's one of the most competitive industries ever. Sometimes it's not about talent, it's about timing, it's about luck, it's about so many different things. So yeah, I guess it was that. It was because I heard sort of anecdotal stories about authors on publishing day crying in the shower or things like that, because you put a lot of pressure on that day that your life is suddenly going to change because this is something you've wanted for years, decades even, but actually it's just a day, and you're still having to get up and wash the dishes, and nothing really changes. So yeah, I think that was what I wanted to do with that piece, was to sort of create a more balanced picture of the job, because that's something that I hadn't seen before. So,
No, I loved it, and I shared it with everyone I knew, and I'd be interested to know what the reaction was like, because I mean, I recently, one of my publishers was late with a payment, and there's like a private Facebook group for authors that I'm in, where I had a bit of a moan, and, you know, and I thought,
you're entitled to.
Exactly. And the reaction was a big kind of 50-50 split, by some people going, yeah, right on, and other people going, oh, don't make a fuss. Don't make a fuss, or you'll get. Did you get that? Did you get any of that?
So I did see like a bit of backlash, and it was sort of I'm pretty sure it was about my article, and the backlash was I think there was just maybe a few successful authors that had been doing this for, I don't know, decades, and I think they were in a really sort of good position, and there was an element of, well, you know, this happened to us, so you need to sort of suck it up, and it's just the way things roll, and then on the other flip side, you sort of had people that were had been trying to get an agent, they've been trying to sort of get published for however long, and there was an element of, oh, she should just be grateful, like she's got a publishing deal, like all her dreams have been made, like, and I get it. I get how hard, you know, I've struggled in different careers. I get how hard it can be when you're trying so hard and you see other people make it and you don't know why.
Yeah.
But I wasn't saying I wasn't grateful. I'm extremely grateful. I think it's more just, this is what it means to be a publishing, like be a published author. And maybe we should talk about the sort of highs and the lows in equal measure. So yeah.
Yeah, the realities of it. And I do a talk for new authors or people just graduating. And I include an excerpt from your blog piece, particularly the list of 5 a.m. wake-ups, working 50-hour week, cancelling social plans, editing on trains, planes, and at the hairdressers, which I've done. I've done all of those, writing on holiday, you know, and I do, and you see the little faces kind of, but now they know. Now they have some, because you're right, no one talks about this stuff.
No one talks about it. And also you kind of forget, don't you? Because a lot of people, it was different for me because I kind of wrote my book in 3 months, and it was sort of the pandemic that kind of spearheaded me to do so. But you know, most people have been writing the one book for maybe years, or sort of writing for years, and you kind of forget that, like, you've had all this time to perfect your book, right? But then as soon as you get a publishing deal, everything is about deadlines. Like if you're on a book a year contract, which most commercial authors are, like it's really tough if you're balancing that with a day job, with caring responsibilities, with everything. So finding that time is really, really hard. And then you've got the whole aspect of producing the quality that people expect, that readers expect. So it's a really hard juggle.
I mean, my mission and part of the podcast is to let people know. We want to inspire people, but we also don't want to be all candy, floss and fluff. We need to let people know this is hard work. You know, like you say, you might be working on book 1 for 10 years and then they want book 2 in 12 months. You know, so you need to get a thing. I mean, people go on courses. I mean, I don't suppose the Curtis Brown course told you anything about this, did they? You know, the realities of it.
I mean, this is the thing, like the one thing the Curtis Brown course does is that you feel like a writer, and that's potentially the thing. What it did for me is that before I'd never felt like a writer, and they tell you to call yourself a writer from day one. So I think it's like you feel like you're part of something. But I do find, Mark, actually what's missing in this industry is sort of transparency about things. And I feel like publishers can probably get better about that. Sort of, if you're, you know, we all know what it's like if you're a mid-list author, you're a super lead title. There are different expectations, but also different sort of maps for your book, and different goals from your book and different spends for your book. And I just feel like there isn't that transparency, which I think that's missing, and that's sort of part of the expectations piece as well. So,
I think we've heard a couple of publishers, and now putting together welcome packs for authors that do give them ideas of, the strange terminology that we use and what to expect and that kind of thing. And that all happened after your book sale article. So I think you have been, I think that and the whole conversation around mental health for authors, I think you've been a great force for change. So, I think that's brilliant that you've done
hopefully. And I will continue to be honest as much as I can, as much as I'm allowed to be.
Brilliant stuff. Let's talk about what's coming next. Your second novel is The House Sitter, coming 2024. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, I love this novel. I hope other people do too. I tell you why, Mark, because when I wrote my debut, I wasn't thinking about sort of like the market. I wasn't thinking about genre. I wasn't thinking about readers, what they're looking for. I wasn't thinking about any of that stuff. I was just thinking about what I wanted to write, and hoping that it becomes a novel and eventually may sell one day. I wasn't thinking, but I think with The House Sitter, over that course of the year, I learned so much about it. Like I actually kind of did research. I spoke to authors. I read the bookseller, all this kind of stuff. So why I love this novel is that it's not just because it's a story that came from my head, but it's also it's sort of more my commercial novel. It's kind of, I know where I am. I know my publisher wants me to be in terms of genre, and I know hopefully how to deliver it. So it's it sort of has a hook where, this woman wakes up in this room and she's sort of next to this dead person, but she's got no memory of what happened. And she runs, she flees, but she's actually a house sitter. So she gets this job in this rural hilltop, beautiful village in Italy, house sitting. She's like, I need to sort of go somewhere to clear my mind. Hopefully things will come back to me. I'll know what happened that night. So off she goes and she's there. And slowly memories are starting to come back to her. But then suddenly this family turns up at the house. And she's like, why is this family there? I've been sort of invited as a house sitter, but they've turned up. They have no idea who she is. She has no idea who they are until she realizes they're the family of the person who she woke up next to, who was dead. So it's like, it's kind of that. So it's almost like a massive family drama with this outsider that's been thrust into their like web of lies and secrets. So yeah, I really enjoyed writing it. It was really complicated, and I'm still editing it now. And I'm hoping I can pull it off. I really, really hoping I can pull this one. But yeah,
a good editor will see us through. A good editor will definitely see us through.
Exactly.
You mentioned Italy there as well. Any research trips to Italy? Was that, or have you been there before?
Well, I'm obsessed with Italy. I got married in Italy. I would like to think in a past life I was Italian, but unfortunately it's not the case. I can speak Italian, or I could at one point speak Italian. It's now quite rusty, but yeah, I'm obsessed with the sort of country and the culture and the lifestyle. And so I knew at one point I would want to set a novel in Italy. But yeah, I actually went to this place where the novel's set, which I won't kind of ruin now, but it's like really incredible because it's like, as I said, a hilltop village, like many Italian villages are, but you have to access it. The only way to access it is through this suspended footbridge, which connects it to the mainland. So then I thought, because there's quite a few island books, but this is essentially, it's not an island, but it could be an island. And that is what happens in The House Sitter. It becomes an island, but I won't say anymore. But yeah, Brilliant. So yeah, it has that element of seclusion and cut off from the world. Love it. It's a great setting for a novel.
Sounds like a great setup. Fantastic stuff. Well, Mira, thank you so much for speaking to us today. Folks, Her is out there in paperback now, or if not very, very soon. I'm not sure when the episode's going out, but yes, grab a copy. And also we'll put a link to that blog piece in the show notes as well, so you can read that. But in the meantime, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you, Mira, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you very much.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. I love, Mark, how Mira talked about this idea of books being partly autobiographical, because I think it's a real honest approach, isn't it, to actually say that out loud? Because there's a lot of the authors that have been interviewed on this show, and when you listen to their story and then you listen to their characters, you kind of think in the background, is that you? Or is that partly you? And I think not many people like to admit how much of their characters have parts of themselves in, publicly at least.
Yeah, especially the villains. I mean, this is the problem is that when we say autobiographical, let's define terms, because it's not, Mira hasn't gone out and murdered people or whatever, or anything like that, or plotted a murder, and just as Agatha Christie never did or anything, or did she? I'm not a witch or anything like that, but the novels are an expression of you, and this is one of the most important things you can do as an author is find your voice, and finding your voice means taking a stance on particular things and putting yourself in the shoes of different characters and seeing the world through their eyes. But it's all filtered through you. And that, like I say, that includes the villains, that includes the people who say the despicable things in your book, the unspeakable things. Now, that doesn't mean we approve of their actions. You can write a character that's bigoted, but it doesn't make you a bigot. And it also doesn't mean that we shouldn't write about these things. I mean, there's a surprising number of people out there, mostly on review sites, who can't get their head around that concept. But we have to tap into that darkness sometimes, just as we tap into the light and the hope and the fears that we have. And this is how we make sense of the world, by investigating those dark moments and those dark thoughts and expressing them in an exciting way as part of a narrative. But absolutely. I think the biggest compliment I think you can get as a writer is when someone says, "Oh, you write just like you talk," kind of thing. Because I think then that's kind of when you found your voice. You're not being pretentious anymore. You're not trying to pass yourself off as an Agatha Christie or whoever your writing heroes might be. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I was always trying on other people's shoes, trying to be other people. And in the end, I was like, actually, I can be me. And Mira discovered this very early on, which is, I think that's the key, to hitting the ground running as a writer is figuring out your voice and opening up and being honest about that kind of thing.
Yeah. I remember John York talking on the show about this kind of two sides to us, the kind of the dark side or the shadow side of us, and the the person of good, trying to, in terms of the positive side of our personality. And I think in some ways, there's an opportunity for writers through their protagonist, antagonist, to kind of spread out the things that they experience in life across multiple characters as well. And I think it's really important to do it because, we're going to talk a bit later on about, the importance of writing as a way of healing, and also as a way of kind of working through. Healing is often working through things that you're dealing with. And sometimes those things you're dealing with are thoughts, ideas, concepts, and you get to play with those when you're writing them into your character. So I think it's fascinating. And I wonder if many authors actually, when they don't realize they're doing it, but when they look back, they have a moment when they, maybe even years later, and they read characters and they've had a bit of distance from where they were at in that time in their life. And they think, oh yeah, I see what I was doing there. And it might become clear later. It's fascinating, isn't it? It's not clear cut, is it? It's not like,
no.
You can't put it in a box.
A big turning point for me, my first play was basically about my family, and it was very honest about my family. And that's why it worked. I did have to talk to my mum and dad about, I said, I'm basically putting versions of you on stage. I'm playing you, Dad, and Claire is playing you, Mum. Are you okay with that? And Dad joked about suing me. But I think because it had that honesty, it resonated with people, not just people who knew me, people who didn't know me. They recognized something in that truthfulness and honesty. And that That's what makes the difference, I think.
Yeah. Sorry, I just had a really bizarre thought. Imagine if your dad had sued you, how successful your play would have been. And then you could have paid him off and you'd be like this famous playwright. We wouldn't even be here, Mark, because you'd be doing Broadway, like writing Broadway shows and stuff.
The way your mind works.
I know, sorry. It just went there. I don't know why. I just thought, no, do you know why? I'll tell you why. Because when you said that, I instantly remembered a story that I read years ago about a child in America suing his parents.
Yeah, that's happened quite a bit, hasn't it? Yeah,
I know, and when I read that story, it just was like, hang on a minute, I just couldn't get my head around it, and it just popped up then, and I thought, oh, it was a big newspaper article. So anyway, brilliant stuff. Let's also talk about this idea of dual narrative, because this is a very interesting thing that people might. Firstly, like probably worth explaining what it is for people who haven't come across it. And I didn't fully understand it before I kind of got into this world. But how would you describe dual narrative to someone that wouldn't know that versus the difference?
Well, one of the big choices you make as a writer when you're telling a story is, okay, whose perspective am I telling this from? If it's a crime novel, are you the cop? Are you the perpetrator? Are you the victim? You know, if you're writing a science fiction novel, are you the human side of things? Are you the aliens or whatever it is? Which character in your ensemble is this story being told through? Now, with the dual narratives, you pick two characters and you switch between the two. Gone Girl, great example of that. And Back to Reality, a great example of that. So, which we did. I mean, Back to Reality, we did dual narratives, switching between Johanna and Joe. But that was in the third person. So there was still a little bit of remove. What Mira's doing with her book, is she's in the first person perspective. So you are, I opened the door, I did this, blah, blah, blah. It's that first person perspective. And which, funnily enough, is what I'm doing at the moment, co-writing with another writer. But I'm just doing the man and my co-writer is doing the woman. She's writing the woman. So we are alternating chapters and we're writing stuff and sending it over. And it's absolutely fascinating. And I do kind of have to get in character for that. I have to, because that first person thing really puts you in their shoes. And we talked about that autobiographical thing. I mean, this person I'm writing is a killer. And not entirely reformed person, not as enlightened as perhaps Mark Stay in the 21st century is. So it's it's fun to write. It's fun to write and play act that kind of person as you're putting it down. So and if you're doing this on your own and having to switch between the two characters, there's potential it could drive you completely potty. But Samira's managed it brilliantly.
We should also say as well, I mean, I'm just looking at the Back to Reality book here, that this is something, and then you kind of mentioned it, but to be clear, it's something that people do chapter by chapter typically. I mean, if you did that in the middle of chapters and you started switching characters, it would get incredibly confusing for the reader.
Can be done.
But we even had. Do you remember we had this discussion with the book where?
Yes, we got the shoe and the trainer. We got the shoe
because
DM.
Even though we're switching characters each chapter, we still decided to have some kind of symbol. And in this case, we've got the DM shoes and the ballet shoe. And
was it ballet shoes or was it just flats? I think it was flats.
Flats. Sorry, it was flats. Yeah, you're right. And so in that case, it's weirdly enough, I just opened it on a chapter where it's got both of them, which means both of them are together.
Interacted, didn't they?
Normally there's just the one shoe, and the shoe represents which character we're now with. And so it's like we even felt like we had to have some visual cue just to help people, because you wouldn't know otherwise, would you? Like if you just start reading something in first person, how do you know?
Well, you can do the George R.R. Martin thing, which we're doing in this new book. So you could have Fred, Mary, Fred, Mary, Fred. Just have that as the chapter title, so people go, okay, right, I know where I am now. So.
But I like the way we did it. I think that was a bit more fun and inventive rather than just being. Yeah, it was neat, and it was so cool because the way it happened was we had the front cover designed, didn't we? Once we'd written the book, hadn't we? We got the front cover designed. And then we had this And from the front cover, we thought we had these two different shoes that represented different characters, and that's when it then went into the chapter.
That was the first cover, wasn't it?
So sometimes it can happen at the end of the process as well. But it's just worth thinking for anyone listening, just thinking, I really like this idea of having these two different narratives going on. You have to kind of also think about how you're going to display that literally to the reader as well, so they don't get confused. Brilliant stuff. Now, also Mira talked about an incredible thing that happened to her during COVID, which I know is reverse of what a lot of people experience, which is she went full on into writing and wrote this book in 3 months, which is insane. Now, I was thinking back, Mark, because we recorded all through COVID, and it's kind of interesting if going back, kind of an interesting thing to do one day is to go back and kind of like track it in terms of when it first started. We weren't really aware of what was going to happen, and then we started talking about how some people, I always remember there were these conversations we had, which is some people were just like, right, I've got time now to write, and they went full on, and there were loads of other people that said, I don't know what to do with myself. I can't write. My creativity's gone out the window. And it was almost like this tale of two cities in some ways, wasn't it? But Mira sounds like she was very much on the kind of
throwing herself into it. Either is valid. I think, if you got the weight of the world on your shoulders, it's how can you write? At first, the whole COVID thing took all the wind out of my sails. I was on a contract. I had to write Babes in the Wood, the second book I had to deliver, but I couldn't do it for the first couple of weeks. I was like, how do I, how do I sit and write a novel? The thing that helped was the 200 word a day challenge. I wrote a short story at first, and that just got me back into the groove again. And then I started on the novel, and it became my happy place. I've used this phrase before. I was, and Mira talks in the interview about visiting the writing world. Well, that's where I go every morning. That is my escape from everything that's on the news or any kind of real world worries that I might have. Just sitting in here, I'm lucky enough to have a room to do it, where I can sit and just escape and have fun with these characters for an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is. And then I'm ready to cope with the real world. That's the other thing. I've got that out of my system, and now it's like, okay, bring it on. So I can understand why people found it overwhelming, but for me now, writing, I've sort of trained myself to make it my escape, to make it my the place where I find peace.
Brilliant stuff. Well, listen, folks, in the extended, if you want to join us there, we're going to be talking more about this. We're going to be talking about healing through writing, which was a huge part of Mira's journey, especially through the grief of losing her mother at a young age. We're also going to talk about launch days, and that launch days are just the beginning of, if you like, the birth of your book, rather than the ultimate end milestone of when the book is launched. And also how that, the realities of that and how you deal with that from a mental health perspective as well. We're also going to look at the importance of this idea of having a writing day, dedicating, or what we're going to discuss more is actually more about a writing time if you find that you're super busy and you can't do that. So if you'd like to join us, please pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. And join us there as a patron of this podcast, and you'll get all these wonderful extra goodies. So, Mark, let's talk about some wins this week.
Where do you want to start?
Let's start with our listeners. I want to start with our Academy members, listeners.
We've got some great ones this week. So GB Ralph, whose new book, Poison at Penshaw Hall, which is the Milverton Mysteries Book 2, #1 bestseller on LGBTQ plus mysteries on Amazon, which is fantastic.
Brilliant.
But Gavin got in touch because he said he was talking about the fact that a year ago he released the first book, and when he'd reached the end, he added a book 2 pre-order link at the back. But he hadn't written book 2 yet. And he didn't have any clue what it was going to be about. But he knew he had a precinct, a cast of characters. He was going to go for it. So anyway, he gave himself that deadline. And all the time the pre-orders were building up. Now, I'm not going to share the numbers because he's asked us not to. But all I'm going to say is his pre-orders were 4 times what he had expected, which is amazing. And he's going to be doing it all over again with book 3, Death in Douglas Glade. And is doing the whole thing again. So I just think, we've talked about deadlines. We've talked about, having that ambition and building that relationship with readers, and Gavin has absolutely done it. So that's just fantastic.
Talk about public declarations.
Yeah.
Printing it in your book. That's as good as it gets. I love
really
that.
Is.
I think that's
really
and how many more people are going to think, I should maybe do that this next. Because also it's a good way of testing the market as well. Like if you do get pre-orders, that's proof in itself. Like if you put that at the back of your book and nobody pre-ordered it, it's kind of like, oh, okay, fair enough. But inspires you. You're also then knowing that you're writing for an audience, even if it's a small number. You know that when you're writing that book is going to end up in people's hands, which I think is one of the challenges we always think, is anyone ever going to read this? So absolutely fantastic.
Brilliant stuff. Over on the Academy, Anne Woodward, she says, I did it. All that faffing about culminated in my sending out my first newsletter today. Now, this is something we talk about a lot. When should you start a newsletter? Today. And took that advice, and she's off. She said the cursing and bad languages stopped emanating from my cabin for a while, because she was trying to get her head around setting this thing up, the tech behind it,
technical. But
the Academy bunch were there, the BXP bunch were there, everyone chipped in and helped her out, and she got there in the end. That's one of the important things of community. And on the Academy as well, Katie Wells, what a day. It's been a big win day. Her a debut novel, A Blend of Magic, which she writes under the pen name Kate Kenzie, has been released to the wild and arrived on readers' Kindles and homes. To have achieved my childhood dream of being an author is overwhelming, but I can't stop smiling. Some said I'd never do it, but I have, and I've got a mug to prove it. The mug is brilliant. It says published author, established 2023. And she said the only problem is readers seem to want another book in the same world from me. Well, maybe, Katie, take a leaf out of Gavin's book there. But it's fantastic. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that. The book is A Blend of Magic. If you like witches and magic, and who doesn't, do check it out. So huge congrats there.
Fantastic. Do you know what? I just thought as well from what Gavin said, and congratulations, Katie. That's absolutely brilliant. And from what Gavin said, it's a great way of building a list. Or continuing to build a list, because it doesn't have to be, folks. You don't have to say for book 2 pre-order. It could just be, if you want a book 2, sign up and tell me. It's like if you get a certain number of people sign up, that triggers book 2. Something around that. Brilliant.
And Kate Baker, also on the Academy, another win from her. She got her first invite as an author to a literary festival. She was at the annual Frinton Literary Festival, and she got to read her short story, The Projectionist, which is which features the protagonist of her next full-length novel. And she's just achieved a public declaration to finish the 60K goal with that one as well, just a few days ago. So congrats on that. But this is brilliant. I mean, Kate, long-standing member of the Academy, her wonderful debut novel Maid of Honor has been an absolute smash. Great reviews for that, and again she's putting it out there. She's saying, okay, I could have just read from my old book, but here's the new book. Let's keep going on. So congrats on that, Kate. That's absolutely
fantastic,
brilliant.
Kate. That's great. Excellent stuff.
And we're recording this last, but by no means least, we're recording this on the 1st of November. And Alan on Twitter, who is at Alan, that's not me, says, maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I could do NaNoWriMo and the 200 words a day challenge side by side. It's not a massive challenge. It's achievable. It definitely is. So good luck, Alan, and anyone who's going on the NaNoWriMo epic saga journey over this month.
I love that. Why don't you make each day of NaNoWriMo, the first part of it, your 200 word challenge? Just get yourself going. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
It can work together. Love it. And is there any more news, Mr. Stay?
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, when was it? Was it
Tuesday? Monday?
No, it was Monday night.
I've lost count. Monday night.
It was Monday night because I was still wiped out from the MCM Comic Con. Yeah, I got an invite to London's glittering King's Cross to the Independent Podcast Awards, where we were shortlisted in the Best Books Podcast category. Now, what's interesting about this is It was at King's Place, which is the big new hot venue at King's Cross. It's amazing. It's and it's quite a good venue for podcast. A lot of live podcasts do shows there and stuff like that. And they were originally, when I first applied, because you have to pitch to be, nominated and all that kind of thing, they were going to have the awards ceremony at the Phoenix Arts Club, which is basically a pub on Charing Cross Road. It's where Gollancz have had Gollancz Fest in the past, and it's a lovely venue, but it's small. So they had to move it to King's Place, which is massive. And I was talking to one of the organisers afterwards, and they said 18 months ago we were terrified no one was going to show up. So the place was rammed, absolutely rammed, and all these amazing podcasts, all on different subjects, and but all independent. None of them are backed by big organisations with loads of money throwing up them. They're not the kind of podcasts that don't have ads every 20 minutes or whatever. So yeah, it was great. And Em McGowan, who's the creator of the Independent Podcast Awards, she was just saying independent podcasts are the cornerstone of podcasting, and it's very often just people doing it from their spare bedrooms or garages or the dining room table, so, and they often do the most amazing, extraordinary podcasts. So it was fantastic. So I went in, we've been here before, we've been nominated for awards before, and never won anything. So that's my kind of, you go in and you don't expect. But I did send you a message before and say, well, look, if we win, what do we, who should we thank? And I had a list of people, and we sorted that out. And then I sat down and the presenter, who's a comedian called Esther Manito, who's very funny. She was really, really good. She said, we're not allowing any speeches tonight. And it was just great. But, it would have, we'd still be doing the ceremony now if they'd allowed speeches. But what they do, once you get your award, you go off backstage and they interview you backstage. So there is film of me thanking everyone. But yeah, I mean, I sat down, had no expectations. Ours was the third award of the evening, so I was like, oh bloody hell, it's suddenly come round quite quickly. So and they the presenter Esther, she got our name wrong. She called us the bestseller experience, and it's not the first time that's happened quite a few.
It is, but it is an experience as well, though, isn't it, Mark?
It really is an experience.
It really is an experience. But I love it. Do you know, I think and we were reflecting on this before the awards. And funnily enough, what was happening with me in Canada is I was sitting there with you on WhatsApp, like bunging you the odd message, and you kind of said you're on your way and da-da-da-da. And then I didn't hear anything for an hour, and I'm like, well, okay, fair enough. And then I realized that the clocks had changed. Oh, right. You were actually an hour that it hadn't even started, and there was, right. And then weird. But what I think is something to celebrate with everyone now. And we do wins every week, so it's kind of fun to do this. But one of the things that we really want to do is we want to thank every single person who's ever listened to this podcast. Yes. And that includes every single person hearing this right now, because we totally recognize that without the listeners, this podcast would just be a private conversation between me and Mark, just waffling on each week. But, we've had over 1 million downloads of this podcast, which is insane when you think about it. It's like top 1% of all podcasts in the world don't, get that. And so thank you to every single person who's listened to the show, told a friend about the show, sent in a story about how the show's helped them, written a book because of the show, or be inspired to start writing again. We've had so many stories of people doing that. And, this is a collaborative effort, and not least, the backstage team that we have, that without them, Mark, it would be impossible to do this podcast, wouldn't it? So we want to say a huge thank you to JD and Dave that really make the magic of this audio each week, and Lisa as well, who does a lot of the admin as well. And yeah, I mean, every single author that's ever been on the show, every publicist. I mean, Mark, you know about the publicist, right? You deal with the publicists, they work really hard for their authors, and there's a lot of conversations that go on, and they never get any recognition for setting up interviews and, helping make things happen.
Which is often the hardest part.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. So thank you to everyone. And we are just so grateful to the Independent Podcast Awards and the judges. I couldn't believe it when I because when you hear about award shows, you think, oh, okay. I went and looked at the judges, and I'm like, this is a proper award. Yeah. This is not. I mean, there were people from the Times and BBC, national newspapers.
This is the little booklet. There's one of these in the post to you now.
Yeah, fantastic!
So keep an eye for that.
Thank you. This is a real honour, and so we're just so delighted that we got nominated and to take home the award. I mean, there were a lot of other amazing book podcasts on there as well, and it was amazing being listed with them. But thank you to everyone for making this night so special.
Now, this is a quality bit of perspex here. And here's the big question. Who gets custody of the trophy? Now, we've only got one. So, do you want it for 6 months and then send it back? Or how do you want to do it?
Do you know what, Mark? Winning the recognition of getting this from the awards is good enough for me. So I want you to put that on your shelf and look at that every day. Well, and then I can see it. I can see it in the background when we record our interviews. It's all good.
When you're next over, I'll bring it over so you can feel the weight, feel the quality.
It's a proper it's got engravings and everything, hasn't it?
It has. It definitely has. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Amazing evening.
Brilliant. Well, listen, folks, it's a great way to finish the show tonight. Thank you again for listening to the show tonight. Mark, how can people find us on social media if they want to spread the word?
We are on the Facebook Bestseller Experiment, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads is @BestsellerXP. Come and say hello. If you've enjoyed this episode, if you've been inspired by Mira, then subscribe, give us a rating, give us a review, do whatever you can to spread the word because it makes all the difference.
Brilliant stuff. And folks, if you'd like to get involved, we've talked about 200 word challenge quite a bit today, but it's there, 200wordchallenge.com. Just go sign up, try and write 200 words a day for 7 days. If you're not doing NaNoWriMo, or if you are doing NaNoWriMo, just give it a go. It really, really works. And if you'd like to join the newsletter for the podcast, just pop along to the website, bestsellerexperiment.com, and click on the newsletter tab where we will send you weekly updates of all the guests that we've had, what we've learned from the podcast, and links to where you can hear it. So folks, thank you again. Mr. Stay, have a fantastic week this week.
You too,
And it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye.
Goodbye.